Collect your belongings and leave the premises. I have tolerated substandard performance long enough, and I will not allow you to damage this organization for another hour." The voice rang across the open office with calculated volume, sharp and deliberate. It belonged to Leonard Crowe, my division head, a man who treated leadership like theater and humiliation like a management tool. He stood near the glass wall of the executive suite, arms crossed, clearly enjoying the attention. "Your role here ends today," he continued, pausing just long enough for the room to absorb it. "Security will accompany you out." Around me, dozens of coworkers suddenly became intensely focused on their monitors, typing without purpose, pretending not to exist. From the far end of the floor, Nolan Pierce, Leonard's chosen favorite, leaned back in his chair with a smug half-smile. Human resources appeared within seconds, eyes down, clipboard ready, avoiding my face as if silence might erase what was happening. What should have been a private discussion was staged as a spectacle. Yet as I picked up my bag and walked toward the elevator, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel humiliated. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I walked calmly, knowing that this moment, though brutal, was not the collapse Leonard believed it to be. What no one in that office understood was that this ending had been forming quietly for months. Since joining Northbridge, consulting nearly 6 years earlier, I had been the engine behind its most successful initiatives. I built campaigns that revived failing accounts, stabilized relationships that were on the verge of collapse, and designed strategies that executives proudly presented as evidence of strong leadership. Leonard absorbed the praise effortlessly. In meetings with the board, he spoke in broad terms, carefully framing successes as the result of his direction while omitting the people who had actually done the work. I allowed it because I needed the job. Consulting is a small world, and reputations travel faster than truth. Speaking up can quietly close doors you don't even know exist, so I focused on results instead of recognition. I told myself that professionalism meant endurance. But endurance has limits, and mine began to erode when the firm's largest client started questioning whether Northbridge still understood their business at all. That client was Calderon Holdings, a multinational firm responsible for nearly half of Northbridge's annual revenue. Their CEO, Samuel Reed, had been increasingly vocal about declining results and lack of innovation. During every call, I listened carefully, noticing patterns Leonard ignored. The issue wasn't effort. It was direction. I spent weeks developing a comprehensive plan that addressed every concern Samuel raised, grounded in data and tailored to the company's long-term goals. It wasn't flashy, but it was effective. When I presented it internally, Leonard dismissed it within minutes. He called it overly complex. He said it was risky. He told the room we needed familiar methods, not experiments. 2 days later, I watched him present the same framework to Samuel as if it were his own, stripped of the reasoning that made it work. The presentation fell flat. Samuel rejected it outright. That afternoon, Leonard summoned me to his office and blamed me for the failure. According to him, my work had embarrassed the firm. When I calmly challenged him, he shut the conversation down and warned me to stay in my lane. The decision to remove me had already been made. The dismissal itself was carefully orchestrated. Leonard wanted witnesses. He wanted silence. He believed fear created loyalty. What he failed to consider were the consequences of his own theatrics. Because of how the termination was handled, Northbridge's legal team later confirmed they could not enforce the restrictive clauses in my contract. There would be no severance, no non-compete, no obligation on my part to protect relationships I no longer had. I walked out of the building carrying a small box of personal items and something far more valuable: freedom. I didn't go home. I sat in a quiet cafe across the street, ordered coffee, opened my laptop, and made the first call that would change everything. Samuel Reed answered immediately. I told him the truth without drama or accusation. There was a pause on the line, followed by a short laugh filled with disbelief. He told me plainly that I had been the only reason Calderon Holdings stayed with Northbridge. The firm hadn't lost a consultant. It had removed its value. When he asked what I planned to do next, and I told him I was launching my own firm, he didn't hesitate. He told me to call him once the paperwork was complete. That conversation turned shock into momentum. Within days, I registered the company, outlined services, and reached out to contacts I had quietly built relationships with over the years. Former colleagues, vendors, decision-makers who preferred working directly with me. The response was immediate. 3 former teammates resigned from Northbridge and asked to join me. 2 vendors offered favorable terms without negotiation. 4 clients expressed interest in transitioning, including Calderon Holdings. 7 days after my termination, Northbridge received a call that would unravel everything Leonard had built. Samuel requested an emergency meeting. Leonard believed it was damage control. He assumed confidence and promises would be enough. The call was brief. Calderon Holdings was terminating its contract at the end of the quarter. Legal teams would handle the transition. Leonard protested, citing loyalty and history. Samuel corrected him calmly. The relationship existed with me, not the firm. Every successful initiative over the past several years had come from my work. The new contract, Samuel explained, had already been signed with my firm. The board demanded explanations Leonard couldn't provide. Internal audits followed. Project records revealed patterns that had gone unexamined for years. My name appeared repeatedly as lead strategist. Leonard's appeared as approving authority. Performance reviews showed consistently suppressed evaluations for high-performing employees whose work Leonard claimed. Client feedback revealed preferences for people Leonard labeled difficult. The image he had crafted collapsed under documentation. Nolan Pierce was the first to cooperate. Faced with evidence, he admitted Leonard instructed him to attach his name to projects he hadn't contributed to. It was framed as mentorship. It was theft. My firm, Meridian Strategy Group, launched officially 3 weeks after my firing. Calderon Holdings became our anchor client. 2 more followed within the first month. Growth was steady, then rapid. Northbridge struggled. Campaigns underperformed. Pitches lacked substance. 6 months after my dismissal, Leonard Crowe was terminated. The announcement cited restructuring. Everyone knew better. He emailed me a year later, apologetic. Vague, I didn't respond. He hadn't failed to recognize my value. He had chosen to exploit it. The months that followed the launch of Meridian Strategy Group were some of the most demanding of my life, but they were also the first time my effort felt clean. Every win was earned openly. Every mistake belonged to me. There was no one above me repackaging my ideas or reframing outcomes to protect their image. Clients noticed immediately. Meetings were direct. Expectations were clear. When something didn't work, I owned it and fixed it. That approach, simple as it sounds, felt revolutionary to companies used to polished excuses. Calderon Holdings expanded our scope within weeks, not because I promised miracles, but because they finally felt understood. Word traveled quickly through quiet channels. Executives talk to each other more than people realize. They trade notes about who delivers and who performs. Meridian didn't grow through loud marketing. It grew through conversations that ended with, "You should talk to her. She actually listens." That reputation, once established, became self-sustaining. Back at Northbridge, the absence of results was becoming impossible to disguise. Leonard tried to project confidence, but meetings grew tense. Without my frameworks, his presentations lacked substance. Clients asked questions he couldn't answer. He responded the only way he knew how, by blaming the team. Staff turnover increased. People who had stayed out of fear began leaving out of clarity. The board, initially reluctant to confront a long-standing executive, started asking sharper questions. They wanted explanations, not reassurance. Leonard offered narratives. The data contradicted him. Projects once praised now struggled to meet basic benchmarks. Revenue projections slipped. The problem was no longer abstract. It was measurable, and Leonard had no one left to quietly absorb the consequences of his decisions. As Meridian expanded, I was careful about who I brought on. Skill mattered, but character mattered more. I'd learned the cost of overlooking that distinction. Former colleagues reached out, some cautiously, some openly regretful. A few admitted they'd known what was happening but hadn't spoken up. I didn't punish them for silence, but I didn't reward it either. Trust, once broken by inaction, takes time to rebuild. The team I assembled was smaller than what Northbridge had boasted, but it was sharper. There were no favorites, no hidden hierarchies. Credit was explicit. Accountability was shared. That environment produced better work, faster learning, and far less drama. The absence of fear turned out to be a competitive advantage. Industry attention followed naturally. Trade journals began mentioning Meridian as a fast-rising firm founded by a former senior consultant who'd left under controversial circumstances. The tone was cautious at first, then curious. Analysts looked at growth rates, client retention, and satisfaction metrics. The numbers spoke clearly. What surprised many observers wasn't just Meridian's success, but Northbridge's decline. The contrast was instructive. One firm grew by empowering talent. The other faltered by consuming it. Leonard's name began appearing in articles as a cautionary example, not out of spite, but because patterns matter. Businesses like lessons they can reuse, even when those lessons come from failure. Leonard was officially dismissed just over half a year after my termination. The announcement was brief and carefully worded, but inside the firm, no one was confused about why it happened. He didn't leave quietly. He blamed market conditions, disloyal employees, unrealistic boards. He never mentioned accountability. That omission told the full story. When his late-night email arrived months later, apologetic but vague, it confirmed what I already knew. He still framed events as misunderstandings rather than decisions. I didn't reply because a response would have required agreement on facts we did not share. Closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from distance. Meridian continued to grow, not explosively but steadily. New clients came with complex problems and realistic expectations. We turned some away. Saying no was new for me, but necessary. Growth without alignment creates chaos. By the end of our second year, we had more work than we could comfortably manage and a reputation for honesty that protected us from overextension. Financially, the firm surpassed anything I'd earned at Northbridge. More importantly, the work felt sustainable. There were no Sunday night anxieties about stolen credit or sudden reversals. Problems existed, but they were visible and solvable. Occasionally, former Northbridge employees reached out asking for advice, references, or perspective. I helped when I could, not because they defended me, but because they hadn't caused what happened either. Most people operate within systems they feel powerless to challenge. I understood that better than ever. Still, I noticed a pattern. Those who thrived later were the ones who reflected honestly on their silence. Those who struggled were often still waiting for someone else to change first. Responsibility doesn't only belong to leaders. It belongs to witnesses, too. One moment stayed with me. During a quarterly review, Samuel Reed told me what he valued most about our partnership. It wasn't innovation or results, though those mattered. It was reliability. When something went wrong, I didn't deflect. When something went right, I didn't exaggerate. That consistency, he said, was rare. Hearing that crystallized something for me. Leadership isn't charisma. It's predictability under pressure. Leonard had relied on performance. I relied on process. Over time, process wins. I never started Meridian to prove Leonard wrong. I started it because staying had become a quiet form of self-betrayal. His public dismissal forced a decision I'd postponed too long. In that sense, he didn't ruin my career. He accelerated it. The success that followed wasn't revenge. It was alignment. Work matched values. Effort matched reward. That alignment created momentum no individual could fake or steal. Nolan Pierce applied to Meridian about a year after Leonard's dismissal. His resume was polished. His message careful. I declined without hostility. Not because I wanted payback, but because I knew who he'd chosen to be when it mattered. People change, but patterns deserve respect. I built Meridian to be a place where integrity wasn't negotiable. Compromising that would have been more costly than any skill he offered. The coworkers who had watched my termination that day scattered in different directions. Some rebuilt successfully. Some didn't. A few reached out years later, still carrying the memory of that moment. I didn't hold it against them. Fear is persuasive, but I never forgot the silence either. That memory shaped how I lead. I never fire people publicly. I never confuse authority with spectacle. Power doesn't need witnesses. Leonard once said my work was incompetent, loud enough for an entire office to hear. A short time later, his largest client walked away, signing with a firm that didn't exist a week earlier. The ideas he'd taken credit for followed me because they were mine. The clients followed me because trust isn't transferable. In the end, nothing dramatic happened to him. No public reckoning, just gradual irrelevance. And that was enough.